Well, wonderful to be with you again. Thought I'd speak here and then we can, interact with each other, more of an informal time. Some of these slides you've seen before, we'll look at them in a little bit more detail. And as we talk about this whole topic of climate change or global warming, it used to be global warming, then it became climate change. I was telling the folks at dinner tonight, when I was a professor at Bob Jones, they invited us to come to the University of North Carolina. This is in the early days before global warming was really a thing. And so they sat us at tables with climate experts. And so our climate expert, I thought I'd ask an intelligent question. So I said, if global warming is true, then what will the weather be like in the future? I thought that was a pretty good question. And the guy said, it'd either be hotter than normal or colder than normal or wetter than normal or drier than normal. And I went like that, and he wouldn't talk to me anymore. So that was my first brush with climate change and talking to a climate expert like that. But he actually turned out to be right. In other words, the reason we talk about climate change is because it's not going to just make things hotter. There's a lot of changes because the Earth is all interconnected. And so there's a lot of changes maybe that you haven't thought about. For example, we're talking about this hurricane that hit Florida. And so the question is, are there more hurricanes hitting North America? Or are they more severe? What do you think? No, okay. And the answer is no. That's right. So if you chart it, you find that it's pretty much the same. Actually, been a little bit less because one of the changes that takes place is you get a lot of shear up in the upper atmosphere. And because of that, they're hoping this hurricane that's going toward Florida, it'll get into a shear area, actually blow the top of it off, and there won't be the destruction that they're thinking it might be if a Category 5 hurricane hits Tampa, Florida, okay? So it's more complicated than a lot of people think about. Anyway, as I've traveled around, and by the way, we'll be at Maranatha Village in Sebring next March. Okay, so that sounds like a good time to be there.
Tell me you met Bonnie Bartell.
Oh yeah, Bonnie Bartell. We were down there. We were driving through to Fort Myers, and we thought, we should go and see this place since I invited us to speak there. And we go in the office, and there's Bonnie Bartell. The famous Bonnie Bartell. And so she looked at me, I looked at her, so I said, Bonnie Bartell. And she said, George Matzko. And so, anyway, we didn't either of us expect to see each other in such a place, but it was wonderful how you meet friends all over the country. Anyways, we traveled around. We've gotten a lot of questions about this topic, probably more than almost any other topic. And what we found is there's a kind of a split between younger Christians and older Christians. So I remember speaking at church in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the young people came out and said, "Oh, it's wonderful how you talked about global warming and how we need to be better stewards of our environment and so forth." But it's more political. In other words, I'd have students when I taught science impact on society at Bob Jones University, I'd say to the students, they come from very conservative backgrounds, and so that none of them believed in global warming or climate change. And I'd say, well, what would convince you? What evidence would convince you? Would 1 degree per year convince you, or 2 degrees? And the answer was nothing would convince them because they believed it because some authority had told them that that's not real, that type of thing. And so we didn't want to go that way either. We don't want people to believe things just because some authority said it. We wanted to believe it because there's actually evidence or something in the Bible that tells us about what we should believe. Anyway, we all know about those poor polar bears, don't we? They have to swim more, having trouble finding food. I don't know if you've heard recently, they were all concerned about the polar bears were going to go extinct. but they're actually bounced back. There's actually a lot of polar bears now. Okay, they apparently are pretty resilient creatures. And so we don't have to worry about the polar bears all dying off like we thought maybe, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And the experts are not encouraging. The National Center for Atmospheric Research is predicting during the 21st century, Earth's average temperature will rise between 3 degrees and 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Sea level will rise between 8 and 20 inches. Number and severity of hurricanes and typhoons, other tropical cyclones will increase. This is the prediction from the experts. So it's easy for people to be scared, alarmed as the bad news keeps rolling in. Or, on the other hand, just say that climate alarmism is fake news, all right? Don't pay attention to it at all. Christians want to know answers to basic questions about global warming from someone other than Al Gore. How serious is it? What causes it? What, if anything, we should do about it? So I speak to you as one who's taught about global warming on the university level for 25 years. So I want to put global warming into its proper scientific and biblical perspective. Now, as we said yesterday, what's the most amazing fact about global warming? And that is that, okay? And we showed you that chart. So here is, this is in degrees Celsius. So minus 0.4, minus 0.2, 0, 0.2, 0.4, 0.6. And they drew a line in the middle, about the middle there. And you see from 1880 all the way up to about 2010 here, this chart goes. And you can see the general trend is upward. And I don't have any particular reason to doubt that that's true. And people on both sides of the political spectrum think that that's just about right, okay? And so a lot of times what will happen is people will cherry pick, the years that they want. They'll compare this year with that year to get so they'll maybe look at it when it's, 1940 going down to, 1960 or whatever. So we'll see it's decreasing, that type of thing. So you have to look at the whole thing to know what's really going on here. And the amazing thing to me, as you heard yesterday, was the fact there's been so little change. Isaiah 45:18, for thus saith the Lord God that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He established it, he created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord and there is none else. So God had a purpose in this earth. He made this earth for life, okay? And that was his intention in making the earth the way that it is. He also promised in Genesis chapter 8, Noah built an ark unto the Lord, took of every clean beast, every clean fowl, offered burnt offerings on the altar. Ever think about the fact that, he just saved these animals in the ark. And the first thing he does is he kills all these endangered animals, all these endangered species, all right? You ever think about that? Amazing when you think about it, but it was more important to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. It said the Lord smelled a sweet savor. Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So we have a promise. We have a promise that this world is going to continue on having seasons and growing seasons, and we're going to have seasons of the year and so forth, and that the earth will continue to be habitable for life, because that was God's purpose all along. And then we looked about how God keeps the earth in balance. So here's my famous chart here, and let me go through it with you. Okay, so all the yellow stuff is incoming. So here's incoming solar radiation, 100%. 6% is reflected by the atmosphere, 20% by the clouds. Now think about that. Think about the fact that there's different kinds of clouds. Some clouds are whiter than other clouds. And so there's almost like a built-in thermostat, Okay, so it seems as thing gets hotter, you get more white clouds on the top that reflect more heat back into space. So it likes self-controlling type of thing. Pagans, evolutionists, they like to talk about Gaia, about how there's this mother goddess that's the earth, and they see this self-regulation as well. But this is something that God has built into the system. And then you have 4% reflected from the Earth's surface. We talked about the ice caps, and so how the white surfaces of the ice will reflect things into space. Okay, and then absorbed by the land, 51% down here. And then we're thinking about, the output. Okay, so 64% radiated into space from clouds in the atmosphere. So if we didn't have that radiation back, if the Earth was more like Venus, where you had all these dense clouds and so forth, you get what they call a runaway greenhouse effect. And, you can melt lead on the surface of Venus. Not a very nice place, okay, to live. 6% radiated directly into space from the Earth and so forth. And there's some things about clouds here. Clouds are really the hard part because it's hard to model the clouds and get all the numbers exactly right. But like I said, I met the guy who came up with these numbers. He was thrilled I was using his numbers in this talk. Are there any questions about this before we go on? Any questions about this chart or anything we've talked about so far? I want to give you an opportunity to question that. Okay, yes? Yes.
The y-axis was it had a zero line. What is the purpose of that specifically?
The zero line here is just the mean. Okay, it's just to have a center. Okay, they're just taking the mean from all the temperatures for that period of time. And why do we choose like 1880? Well, because temperature measurements before that are a bit suspect, okay? So in terms of modern type of temperature measurements, 1880 is about where we start with that. You say, well, how do they know about temperatures before that? And we have what's called proxy indicators, okay? Things like ice cores and tree rings and things going on in the bottom of the ocean and so forth. And so there's these proxy indicators they use to try to figure out what the temperature was like in the past. But it gets messed up because they think the Earth's history is really long, millions and billions of years. And so you have to kind of compress that into our timeline of 6,000 or 7,000 years. So it kind of gets goofy when you go that direction. Does that make sense, Greg? Okay. Any other questions about that one before we go on? Hey, and oops, I went the wrong way. Okay, any questions about that one?
Why is it a budget?
Because you get as much in as you get out. So at home you have a budget, so you have your income and you have outflow, and they better match.
If there's the solar burst, so does that mean it's absorbed or reflected to compensate at some point based on the numbers?
Yeah, so the question is whether, the different changes in the sun's output and so forth have to be adjusted for. And the sun's been pretty constant. Compared to other stars that we've looked at, the sun is really kind of, and that's one of the reasons we know that God made it especially for our planet. People often talk about the sun as being being an unimportant star, being normal star and so forth, but really it's kind of a spectacular star as far as keeping life on Earth. Do you have another question about that? Okay. Yes?
Does the sun ever have flare-ups that make short-term difference in changes?
They do. They do. They have. So, for example, in 1859, there was the Carrington event. And so there was a solar output there, a flare that went, we call them CMEs, coronal mass ejections, and it headed right for the Earth. And when it hit the Earth in 1859, there wasn't much it could disturb because all they had was telegraph back then. But the telegraph keys went up and down by themselves, and the telegraph paper caught on fire. And they had aurora down in Havana, Cuba, in Mexico City. Okay, And if that kind of CME took place now, estimates are that it would take 2 years to repair it, okay, to get everybody back online, because it would fry all those big transformers we use for power transformation, okay, the power grid, and we don't have that many spares, okay. So that's, yes, it could.
How does that affect the temperature of the Earth? Does that anything change? Or?
It's really not that big a deal as far as the temperature of the Earth is concerned, because it's a single burst, okay? And like I said, the Earth has within its ability, it has like this thermostat, you know, so if it gets too hot, you get more clouds reflecting, you know, into space and that type of thing. There are other thermostats like that on the Earth that kind of control that type of thing. Good question. Anything else? Okay. So we looked at some of these. We'll just go over them just to review the things that God had to balance. The budget, you know, the solar budget, okay. The, oops, for some reason here we go. The heat radiated from the north and south poles has to be adjusted for. The decay of radioactive isotopes. So it's interesting that we're protected from that radioactivity, from those radioactive isotopes actually being in the crust of the Earth. And so, but we do get, there is energy from that, okay? So the spontaneous decay of radioactive isotopes like uranium, thorium, potassium, present in various minerals in the Earth's crust. And as I mentioned yesterday, about half of the heat from the interior of the Earth comes from the decay of radioactive isotopes, and the other half is probably left over from the original creation. Any questions about that? Yes?
When you say leftover from the original creation, what does that mean?
It means that when God created the Earth, he created it with a temperature, okay? And so, and it looks like the same thing's true for Jupiter and for Neptune and for Saturn, that they were created hot and they've been cooling off for 6,000 or 7,000 years.
So how does that cooling off correlate with global warming? If the Earth is cooling off over time.
Well, it's something that has to be balanced, okay? So one of the questions creation scientists have that, we don't believe that radioactive decay rates were constant in the past. We've only been measuring them since Madame Curie. And so there's an idea that there was rapid decay of radioactive isotopes, say during the flood and so forth. And so that's something that creation scientists have to wrestle with as far as, why was the Earth warmer in the past? Okay, so if we dig down in the Earth and look at what things were like before the flood, we find, ferns up in Alaska and that kind of thing. It looked like things were warmer before the flood than they are today. So that's part of that, okay?
So do you think we're warming back up to Earth's proper temperature after the Ice Age?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a proper temperature. I mean, no, who can say what the proper temperature is? Okay, all we know from the Bible is that he's going to keep it within limits to allow life on the planet to exist, okay? And to farming and to seasons and that type of thing. We're not given any other promises beyond that, okay? So the people in Canada, in the future, may be able to grow more crops or for longer periods of time. I'm happy about that as the climate continues to change, okay? Depending where you live. Any other questions on that? Yes? How hot is the core of the Earth? That's a good question for Siri. So I don't know the answer to that, but I could find out just by whipping my phone out, and I bet you could too. Okay. Good question for Siri, not for me. Okay. That's a Siri question. And we're talking about the dust, the fact that you're converting potential energy into kinetic energy. That has to be balanced. The tidal forces, okay, that have to be balanced as well. Amazing thing is, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow night, that the fact that the Earth year varies by so little. I mean, the Earth day varies by, you would expect with the moon pulling on the Earth all the time, it would slow the Earth down and the day would get longer. But it turns out that the outer planets like Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and so forth, they all are pulling on the system. They're actually adding energy to the Earth-Moon system, keeping our day stable. So it's part of the precision that God's built into the solar system, which I think is really cool. And then we talked about the fact that the high heat capacity, we did some experiments for you. We talked about the high heat capacity. So water really is a special chemical. Tomorrow and with the students, we'll be talking about water, the miracle chemical, and how it really is just very unusual molecule. And you can see the earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein, for he hath founded upon the seas and established it upon the floods. It's like the building block for everything else, this molecule of water. So that's part of this as well. And we talked about the greenhouse effect and how the greenhouse effect gets a bad rap. But again, without the greenhouse effect, the earth would be too cold. It would be below freezing on average, and life couldn't live here. And all the water would be locked up in ice. It wouldn't be a very nice place. And then we talked about the air currents. So you're aware that hot air rises, cold air sinks. And Ecclesiastes, Solomon talks about the wind currents. It's interesting, a little bit of scientific foreknowledge where the Bible talks about currents, the wind currents, the winds around on the earth. He had no opportunity to observe that himself, but we found out much later about how the winds distribute the heat and different chemical compounds in the atmosphere. Okay, and then we talked about this tilt of the earth, how the tilt is so important. Without the tilt, if the earth was straight up and down, then all the water would freeze at the poles, okay, and it would be a desert in between. Okay, so the tilt gives us the seasons. Okay, we'll talk more about that tomorrow when we talk about the moon. So that's really important as well. And there's just no other planet like that. There's no planet that has a big moon in the ecliptic orbit that stabilizes the tilt. So as I mentioned yesterday, the Mars has just a couple little moons, and the tilt of Mars goes from 0 to 60 degrees. Okay, you can't live on a planet like that. Elon Musk hasn't figured it out yet, but you can't do that. Okay, so it's only here on Earth that we have this stable tilt because we have this very unusual orbit. Most moons go around their planets in the equatorial region, the fattest part, okay? Whereas our moon is in this ecliptic, which stabilizes the tilt. So it's just, God made it just exactly what it needs to be to allow life on the earth. Okay, so after all, any questions on that before we go on and talk more about what's going on today? Any questions about any of those slides? You know what the greenhouse gases are? I didn't mention them, I should have. So carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, all are considered to be greenhouse gases and trap the heat. Okay, so isn't it possible that man through his actions could upset this incredible heat balance that God designed? Secular scientists are concerned about many climate unknowns. Many believe as humans make more and more carbon dioxide by burning the rainforest, driving cars and trucks, burning fossil fuels for industry, that temperatures will inevitably rise. Then the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere continues to rise, and then the Earth would continue to warm. And they're right, the concentration of carbon dioxide is continuing to rise. All the time we've been measuring it since the 1950s. One of the unknowns for them is to predict the future using computer programs. So this is from the IPCC, and it took 102 IPCC, International Protocol on Climate Change, models. And so here's the observation. So the circles are balloons, the squares are satellite data sets, and here is the prediction based on the computer program. Now, as you can see, they didn't do very good, did they? Okay, and the reason for that is that they use the same kind of computer programs we use to predict the weather. Okay, and that's the reason why you'll find that meteorologists tend to be the most skeptical about climate change, because they understand the computer models. So if I told you that it was going to rain tomorrow, you might take an umbrella. If I told you it's going to rain next week on Tuesday, you would say, well, maybe it will or maybe it won't. Okay? If I told you it was going to rain a month from today, you'd say nuts. Okay? Nobody can tell us a month ahead of time. But these are the same kind of computer models, okay? And they're telling us what's going to happen over long periods of time, hundreds of years and thousands of years into the future. And so no wonder they don't work very well, okay? Because the limitation of our computer models. So all they can do is take the data from the past and try to extrapolate into the future. Any questions on that? Scientists are concerned about the thermohaline circulation. Now, the thermohaline circulation is what we call the Gulf Stream in our country. Okay, so you can see that red part. Let me get my pointer here. The red part here, this is the Gulf Stream. It's coming up here. It goes like this. The warmer water stays on top, and then air currents cause it to blow across Europe like this. Okay, and so they're concerned that what happens with this big chunk of ice here called Greenland, if it melts, it's going to pour all this fresh water into the North Atlantic, and it's going to shut down the conveyor belt because fresh water is lighter than salt water. Okay, it's on the top. So now you have cold water on the top and warmer water on the bottom, and it just boxes the whole works up. And so what would happen in a case like that is that Europe would freeze over solid. Okay, so when we talk about climate change, remember the guy told me it'll either be hotter than normal or colder than warmer? Okay, well, he was right. In Europe, it'll be colder than normal with climate change because of the thermohaline circulation going away. Question about that? Okay, what else are they concerned about? They're concerned about the collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet. Now, we don't care about the Arctic as much because the ice is floating on water, and so like an ice cube in a glass of water, if it melts, the level stays the same. But the Western Antarctic ice sheet is actually on land, okay? And if it melts, it all goes into the ocean and raises the ocean levels. And the problem is that Western Antarctic ice sheet has volcanoes underneath of it. There's about 100 volcanoes underneath of it, and it's keeping that ice sheet liquidy under there. And so it literally could go, into the ocean, at any time. And it hasn't done that. And if it does that, goodbye Florida, goodbye New York City, goodbye Hong Kong. Okay, a lot of low-lying areas. I said that in Florida one time. Yeah, you know about that. Said that in Florida one time, and my wife said, you shouldn't say that when you're in Florida, because all these people that build all these houses on low-lying land. Okay. So, they're concerned about that. But what does the Bible have to say about climate change? Let's see what the Bible says. Well, first of all, let's establish what climate is. So climate is a multi-decade average of weather properties. You know how when you are, you have a big flood here in New Hampshire, and they find the oldest guy in town, and they say, have you ever seen anything like this? No, we never had like this in my lifetime, that type of thing. Well, it's because he hasn't lived long enough, okay? So weather is something that changes all the time. Climate takes a long time. So most climate changes are things that are longer than the average lifetime of an individual. So sticking a microphone in front of them and saying, have you ever seen anything like this before, doesn't make any sense from a climate point of view. It has to be a longer period of time. So what does the Bible say? Well, Genesis 6, 5 through 8, as God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, every imagination of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually, and repented the Lord that he made man on the earth. It grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping things, the fowl of the air, for repented me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So we want to talk about climate change. There is climate change. It's called the flood. And the flood covered all the land surfaces, okay? It altered the world that we live in. And so before there was probably one big continent, like a Pangea-type continent. It split apart. Before there were probably low mountains and hills, and now there's big mountains and so forth. All that formed by the flood. And so what caused all that destruction? And the answer is sin. The greatest pollutant in the world is man's sin. Nobody ever talks about that, but that's what caused the last big change in climate. And the flood led to this. Okay, we talked about that a little bit last night in one of the questions. So you have the fountains of the great deep break open, and the water is warm. And what's going on at the same time is you have a lot of volcanic activity. We spent a lot of time in Australia, and the whole east coast of Australia, the Great Dividing Range, is all extinct volcanoes. Sometimes they're all on fire, okay? And it must have been quite a sight at the time. There are no volcanoes in Australia now, but there was back then. So you're putting all these aerosols into the air. The sunlight can't get through. And so you got warm water, which produces evaporation, cold air, which produces snowfall, and you get glaciation. Okay? And we know that the glaciers formed in the middle of the continents and moved toward the edges where the warm water was, because we can see the scratch marks on the rocks. We see it went in the middle to the edges. It didn't melt in the summertime because it didn't get warm enough. And so those glaciers build up, and the pressure pushed them out and so forth, until, maybe 600 years later, the seas cooled back down, okay, to more like they are today, all right? So the fact that there was an ice age is evidence for the flood. You can't have a flood without an ice age. So you can't have the ice age without the flood is what I meant to say. And so you think about Antarctica. Antarctica has got that big chunk of ice there, miles deep, and it's the driest continent on Earth, drier than the Sahara Desert. So how do you build up all that ice in Antarctica? Well, it was all built up during the Ice Age. And you only had an Ice Age because there was a global flood. Okay? They all work together. What we would expect as Bible-believing Christians, we'd expect as things continue to warm up, that the ice caps, the ice would melt, and that we would see sea levels go up. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Okay? There's a lot of variation, but the general trend has been warmer, drier, and sea level rise. So we mentioned last night about how the climate's been changing. So we said about Sahara Desert. Sahara Desert used to be arable. We know there are large communities of people living in the Sahara farming. We find the skeletons of crocodiles and hippopotamus and so forth in the Sahara Desert. We can see on the pyramids, we can see where there was a lot of rainfall because we can see the water erosion patterns on the pyramids and the Sphinx and so forth. You look at classical Greece. You remember Jason and the Argonauts? Remember Jason and the Argonauts? So the Greeks could sail all the way from Greece through the Black Sea and through the Aral Sea and the Caspian Sea, all the way to the Himalayas. And now it's all just howling desert there in Kazakhstan. Okay? So we've seen all these changes at the end of the Ice Age. See, people say, when did the Ice Age actually end? And the answer is, in a sense, it's still going on today. Fountains, the Great Deep broke open, and so that water below the surface was already warmer, when it was released. It's under pressure, okay? So in my version of the flood, I'm not doing the flood tonight, my version of the flood, the fountains of the Great Deep break open, they shoot up into the sky and then rain back down on the earth like that. And that's how you get 40 days and 40 nights of rain, from that. And so it's still warm. They talk about the American Indians. How did the American Indians get to North America during the Ice Age? And they have to have this magic corridor open up. You ever watch that cartoon Ice Age? And they show that magic corridor open up and all the animals walk through it and so forth. But no, the water was still warm, and so they could just go around the Bering, and the water levels were lower. They could go around on the Bering Sea there, following the coastline and taking canoes and so forth. All that's underwater today because the water levels were so much lower at that particular time. Also helped the animals get from the Ark to Australia, because again, there was land bridges to Australia at that time. So all of it fits together if you think about it. Any other questions about that? I know we're covering a lot of material here. All right. So that's an important slide there. So how should Christians think about climate change? Well, Romans 8:22 says, we know the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. As we mentioned yesterday morning, earth is under a curse of sin. It's groaning, decaying, waiting for a time of renewal. The earth is running down. So the answer to the question that we initially posed is, isn't it possible that man through his actions can upset this incredible heat balance that God designed? And the answer is yes, okay, because this is a sin-cursed world. Is it possible that man through his actions can upset it? Yes, but not through the burning of fossil fuels, but mostly by sinning against the Creator. Remember, sin is the greatest pollutant. And man's sin will be reason for climate change in the future. Romans 8:7. First angel sounded, and a third part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. That's going to be a lot of climate change. So the tribulation period is a time of great climate change. And it's also clear that it's not man-made in the sense that the judgment comes because of man's sin. So how should Christians think about climate change? Well, we all need to understand, and we'll talk about more of this on Wednesday, about the scoffers. We're going to talk about living in the age of scoffers. So knowing this first, there should come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lusts and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they are willingly or ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that was being overflowed with water perished, but the heavens and earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. And so these scoffers, who are they concerned about? Who are the scoffers concerned about? Well, it says they walk after their own lust. They are more interested in what they can get out of a situation than in helping others. I would tell my students, I said, they want to know, who supports actions against global warming and so forth. So follow the money, okay? So what if you make windmills? You're General Electric and you make windmills, okay? So they have financial incentive, okay? So you have to look at where the money goes. And I think this strong desires for money and fame and prestige and power could easily describe some of the politicians and corporate leaders who are pushing for action on climate change for political and financial gain. Now, world leaders haven't figured this out yet, but there's not an infinite amount of money out there. Okay, I know they don't know that. A trillion here and a trillion there, after a while, it adds up to real money, doesn't it? Government spending on climate change, that has to come from somewhere. And we know, as far as government dollars are concerned, what saves more lives. And the answer is clean water and sanitation. Okay? We know if you give people clean water and sanitation, you'll save more lives than anything else you'll do. Okay? But so what do? We take the money that could go toward clean water and sanitation, we spend it for schemes that we don't know if it's going to make a difference or not. And there's something fundamentally immoral about that. So who gets it in the neck? Who are the ones who are hurt by this? And the answer is poor people. Okay? Should Christians care about poor people? The answer is, yeah, we should care about poor people, okay? So the people that are hurt the most are the poorest people on earth, and we should care about that as Christians. Unlike the scoffers, Christians believe that God can and does intervene in the world. Verse 5 says that they're willfully ignorant and deny the judgment of a worldwide flood caused by God. They believe that man, not God, is ultimately in control of the environment, of the climate. There's no thought of God creating all things. There's no acknowledgement that God can step in and out of this natural cycle into our history, into our climate, into our lives. And unlike the scoffers, Christians believe that Christ can return at any time. The scoffers say, where's the promise of his coming? So how about us? Do we believe that Jesus Christ could return at any time and take control of our planet? I mean, he made it. I mean, he has the right to do that. Could he come back this evening? And the answer is he certainly could. Are you expecting his return? You know, a lot of verses, you don't hear them much these days. I just chose 4 talking about Christ's return so that you come behind no gift, waiting for the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Looking for that blessed hope, the glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. And unto them that look unto him shall he appear a second time without sin unto salvation. Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, hope to the end of the grace that be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And I could have had 30 more verses like that. All through the Bible, people are told to expect the coming of Christ, to look for it, to long for it. And in our materialistic age, we don't. We have pretty good lives right here, okay? And we're not thinking about how wonderful it would be if Christ returned at any moment. That blessed hope. So look, watch, wait for the return of Christ. Christ's literal return is certain. Are you ready? Are you watching as well as waiting? Christ's return is as certain as the payment he made for sin of the world when he died on the cross. Now, we may not be able to influence the policies of governments regarding climate change, but we can calm the fears of our Christian brothers and sisters by pointing them to the creator and sustainer of our planet. Our trust is not in climate modeling software to predict the Earth's future. Our God is in control. When time comes for the groaning and travailing to be done, there will be a new earth filled with righteousness. Okay, what questions do you have? That's what I have to say. Any questions about any of these topics? Yes, sir.
How does the rotation of Jupiter and Saturn affect Earth? You touched on it briefly.
Right, so the outer planets, repeat question, all right, yeah, she always reminds me, yeah. So the question is, how do the motions of Jupiter and Saturn and Neptune and so forth affect what's going on Earth? And so it's just like a big mechanism. The outer planets add energy to the inner planets. They add energy to the Earth-Moon system and keep it stable.
How is that energy transferred?
Through gravity. So gravity is the means by which the energy is transferred from the outer planets to the inner planets. Okay, and keeps our Earth-Moon system stable over thousands of years. So they have a purpose, okay, other than keeping big rocks from hitting us, like a cosmic vacuum cleaner. It also keeps our Earth-Moon system stable. And so we should thank the Lord for the outer planets. They're not there just for looks. They're there because they actually have a purpose. Yes, sir.
I think, maybe it's trying to summarize what you're saying. We often think of climate change and, oh no, New York City's gonna go underwater, but there have been many major cities in history that basically disappeared. And it's gonna and God isn't gonna judge the entire earth, he promised that. But that doesn't mean there's subtle, well, not that New York City's subtle, but
People there would be object to that.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yankee fans. But the idea though that we often try to, I think the world's trying to think of, they try to they want to avoid disaster, they want to avoid pain.
Yes.
And we need to recognize pain is a reality because of sin. And the reality is there could be subtle, painful experiences because of climate change.
Yeah. And the idea that people building these mansions on the seacoast makes no sense whatsoever. And the only reason it can be done is because of flood insurance, government financed flood insurance. And so as taxpayers, you should object to this, financing mansions on the seacoast that are going to get blown down by hurricanes and so forth. So even though the number of hurricanes and so forth has not increased and their severity has not increased, guess what has increased? The property damage. The property damage has just gone through the roof because we have more people living in those kind of places where they're likely to be harmed by hurricanes and floods and that type of thing. So we can do something about those government property, policies. We can vote for politicians who are not going to extend those kinds of guarantees to people living in dangerous places. Okay? You think about all the people who live in the Sahara Desert, or Kazakhstan for that matter. You can't live there anymore. So climate change has been taking place. People's lives have been changed because of it, and it will continue to take place into the foreseeable future until the Lord returns. Thanks for that. Yes?
Is the Antarctic ice sheet on a continent, or is it in the water itself? Is it like a...
No, it's on a continent. So it's on land, and that land may presently be some of it below sea level, but that's just because it has this huge weight of ice pushing down on it. But as the ice melts, the land goes up. We've seen that in Greenland as well, that it springs back up again after the ice melts. There's actually a Grand Canyon of the Antarctic. I don't know if you realize that, but there's actually a formation there. It looks like our Grand Canyon in Arizona and so forth. And we just never seen it because it's under so many tons of ice.
I was just wondering because if you took a piece of ice and put it in water, part of it's going to float.
Yes.
And also ice, the volume of ice is greater because it's ice.
Yes.
So as it melts,
There's no change in.
I would think the displacement would be the same.
That's right. But it's because Antarctic ice is on and Greenland ice is on land, it makes all the difference in the world. So that's why they're concerned about that.
So a melting iceberg wouldn't really change anything.
Melting iceberg doesn't change anything, right? Only ice that's up on land. So and you say, well, how much difference will there be? And they argue about that. Somewhere between 5 and 20 meters. Well, even 5 meters would be, that would be end of New York City. Okay, 5 meters.
That's an awful lot of melted ice, though.
It is. But that whole
Be
western,
the entire continent.
that's right. But that western Antarctic ice sheet could slip off fairly rapidly. Okay, maybe that'll happen during the tribulation period. Maybe that'll be something that'll take place then. I don't know. Okay, yes.
One of those first charts you showed, one from like 1880
Yes.
present time, there was a 1 degree change.
Yes.
That 1 degree, does that have any effect on the glaciers?
Yeah, oh sure. 1 degree, the question is, does that 1 degree change in 100 years have any effect on the glaciers? Thank you. And the answer is yes. That's 1 degree Celsius doesn't seem like that much, but it does make a difference as far as, and warming seems to be taking place more in the colder places, like in the Arctic and Antarctic. In other words, the Earth is not warming uniformly. It's warming more at the poles than it is in the middle. Just weather patterns. I mean, weather has a big part, air currents and weather patterns, that type of thing. Yeah, that's why. Yes?
It may be a little bit more of a philosophical kind of question, but considering the willing ignorance that we just saw,
Yes.
that God spoke about through Peter, I mean, do you believe that, like, because you know the scientific community, that like maybe the precondition of real scientific discussion or a real, an honest appeal to science has to in some way be based on, I guess, uniformity in nature? And if that's true, and most of the scientific community that isn't theistic wouldn't even have a way to qualify that honestly, do you believe that that would spark a dishonesty or really disingenuous kind of proposals and reasoning?
So if I summarize the question, I think it's, is the scientific community open to even discussing this possibility? Is that what you're saying?
Sort of. I mean, science seems to be based somewhat on uniformity in nature, because otherwise
Yeah.
they don't have really a grasp of anything solid there.
Yeah.
So where they can't really come up with a good solution for uniformity in nature, do you think that's kind of just a pointer towards their thinking is not only flawed, but it's also flawed intentionally?
Yeah. Well, there's kind of a feedback effect there with scientists. I found that scientists in Australia are more likely to question the things that are considered to be true in the broader scientific community, just because of their culture questioning authority. They have more of an authority questioning culture than we have in this country. We tend not to question authority as much as they do. So I've seen that difference. And a lot of the climate skeptics come from Australia because of that fact. But once it becomes fact, scientific fact, then the government starts handing out money based on it. And so if you're going to get money for your scientific research, you link it to something, like climate change, where you can get some money from it. And we've seen that over and over again, that they want money for their research, and so they're going to say or do what they need to in order to get that. So there's been some bad actors in the past where we've gotten some emails and so forth where the scientific authorities have tried to shut down any dissent, that goes counter to their ideas, and they won't let the other side come out. You wouldn't expect that in science. You expect science to have this free exchange of ideas. But unfortunately, scientists are just like other people. They may wear white coats, but they're sinners. Okay, they react in a way to protect their own grants and money for their research. There's the pie's only a certain amount, and if you take something from this part of the pie, somebody else is going to have to do without, and they know that very well. So anyway, I'm not getting into that, but there's a lot of economic incentives for everybody to lockstep in a particular direction. So what is going to happen in the future? Well, global warming has a lot to do with what the sun is doing. Is that surprising? Okay, the energy comes from the sun, right? So what's going to happen with the sun in the future? And the answer is, we don't know. Some scientists say that the sun is going to start cooling down. We've seen what we call minimum in the sunspots and so forth. Some scientists have been predicting that this next lifetime, next 30 years or 40 years or whatever, that we're going to have colder than normal temperatures because the sun's shutting down. We saw that happen back in the 1680s. They call the Monner minimum, where the sun produced a lot less energy, and things got really cold. The Thames froze over, and the crops failed. It was a lot of famine. People died, and so forth. Could that happen again? The answer is yes. Okay, and all the people who expect things to get warmer, they'd be upset. Okay? But so as far as temporary changes, we can't say anything about what's going to happen in the near future because we don't know how the sun works. We know it has this 11-year cycle and so forth, but we don't know how it works. And until we know how the sun works, we can't predict what's going to happen here on the earth. So I am a global warming agnostic. Probably the first agnostic ever to speak in this platform. Okay? Because I don't believe science has the tools to predict what's going to happen in the future. It's too complicated. Okay? And so if it gets warmer, I'll understand that. If it gets colder, I'll understand that as well. But we know it's all in God's hands. Yes?
Don't a lot of people that talk about global warming or climate change actually mean human-produced global warming or climate change?
Yes, that's right. They're really interested in how much of that global change, the climate change is because of humans' activities. And so what's the number? I'm willing to believe that we have some number. I mean, that I don't know what it is, though, and I don't think we have the ability to tell what that change is. I don't think we can come up with a number. Okay, I'm willing to believe it's some number, but I don't know what it is. That's another reason I'm an agnostic.
Do you believe, though, that whatever humans do contribute, I guess I view the Earth as sort of a control system with feedback, and like you said,
Yeah.
you get more clouds and that reflects, don't you think it would just balance out?
Well, if it was the original design, but you have to realize it's cursed by sin. And that's what a lot of climate skeptics forget about. They forget about the fact that this is not God's original design, that the thing is, entropy is taking hold here. And it doesn't have to last forever, it just has to last until the Lord returns. Okay, yes?
I talked to a lot of students about some of this, and a question, maybe this is more of your opinion, in relation to the creation mandate, where we're supposed to take care of the earth, and we're stewards of the earth and creation, where's that balance? We're caring for the earth versus we're worshiping the earth. Like, I'm not just going to throw it all aside and just say, let's just do whatever and just slash and burn everything, but I'm also not worshiping the earth and making it my end all.
So-
What do you say to students or Christians who struggle with balancing those two?
So what's the balance between creation care and stewardship and becoming environmentalist and so forth? And I would say the answer is given by money, okay? So I didn't do that tonight, but I can show you charts and graphs showing if you took all the money in the world and threw it at this problem, that you maybe get a decrease in temperature of maybe a couple tenths of a degree. Okay? In other words, you throw everybody out of work. In Australia, they did something like this. They decided in their great wisdom that they would solve the global warming problem by shutting down all their cement kilns. So cement produces a lot of greenhouse gases. And so they effectively shut them all down, threw all those people out of work. We were there when it happened. And now they buy all their cement from China. And guess what? China doesn't have any regulation. And so China produced cement, they produced 10 times more greenhouse gases than Australia ever did. So it doesn't make any sense even from their point of view. Okay? So I'm saying is that there's not enough money in the world to really affect the problem. In other words, the climate's going to do whatever it's going to do, and our paltry efforts, all we'll do is throw people out of work. So, in other words, usually you ask people, how much money are you willing to spend on this? They've asked people this question. In other words, are you willing to spend $10 on it, $20, $100, and so forth? And you get to some level where people say, no, I'm not going to, not going to take my money and spend it on this problem. And people forget that the money the government spends on it comes from them. It's not free money, okay? It comes from somewhere. So that's kind of a political thing. But politics has to do with limited resources, how we're going to use those limited resources in the most effective way. I mean, that's what politics is all about. My wife said it's time. Here's one more question. Yeah.
My memory tells me late 1700s, early 1800s, when New England went through a period where basically they had no summer.
Yes, that's right. So the question was about, wasn't there a time in New England when there was a time when there was no summer? So George Washington was fighting the British in New York City, and he was able to drag those cannon across the Hudson River. That's how frozen it was. And the Potomac froze over and so forth. So there have been times in our history where there have been really cold winters. And why did they occur? Well, some of it's because of volcanic activity in like Iceland or other places that threw up dust. We saw a cooling down when Mount Pinatubo blew up in Philippines. We saw a cooling for like 3 years because of Mount Pinatubo. And so yes, these things can happen over short periods of time. But we're talking about climate tonight. We're talking about the long-range changes. Well, this has been very helpful. I hope if you have any other questions about that, bring them tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we're talking about the moon, and I think you'll enjoy hearing about God's created moon, a signpost from God. So let's go ahead and pray, and we'll let you go. Heavenly Father, we thank you for our opportunity to speak about this world and how you created it and how it's been destroyed and being destroyed by man's sin. And Lord, we know what the solution is. We know the solution is Jesus Christ. And you're going to come again, and you're going to fix everything, Lord, that's broken. There's going to be a new heavens and a new earth where righteousness dwells. And we won't have to worry about climate change in the new heavens and new earth because it's going to be the original design when you fix all the things. Thank you, Lord, for this evening together. Thank you for these folks. And help us, Lord, to serve you better tomorrow than we did today. For Jesus' sake, amen.